Hey there and welcome back to another Dreamworks video. And recently, I actually got around to watching the film Megamind. And for years people have been telling me, oh, you should watch Megamind, it's great, you'll really enjoy it. And for some reason, this hit me in that part of the brain where you just make bad decisions and then stubbornly insist that you are right. And for some reason, I got it in my head that Megamind was going to be bad, that it was a poor quality film and that it would be cringe and terrible and all the stuff that angsty edgelords say about films they've never seen. And so yeah, I spent a good decade avoiding this. And now, I finally got around to watching it. Shit, I feel pretty stupid, because I very much enjoyed the film, like, a lot. And I'll admit that this is likely heavily influenced by recency bias and all that, but I'd argue that this is one of DreamWorks' best films. How the hell has this not received the same sort of attention as some of their other movies? How in the world did this not get a sequel? There was a Boss Baby 2, and yet no Megamind 2? Ugh. Life just isn't fair. But anyway, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the film, released in 2010, Megamind tells the story of Megamind, an alien sent to Earth moments before his home planet was sucked into a black hole, who crash lands in a prison in Metro City and is raised by the inmates there alongside his fish companion, Minion. After being allowed out of prison to attend a local school, he finds himself the frequent target of bullying by his peers, with a particular focus given by the future hero, Metro Man, who is yet another baby who's been sent to Earth as a child from a dying planet and serves as a parody of Superman. This bullying and lack of acceptance eventually drives him down the path of villainy as he feels like he has no other choice, and thus he begins his great rivalry with Metro Man. And over the years, Megamind finds himself constantly outmatched by Metro Man, being defeated again and again, but his desire to be a glorious villain never wavers. And he enacts his greatest plan during the grand opening of the Metro Man Museum. Using journalist Roxanne Ritchie as bait, he lures Metro Man into the path of his latest death ray, supposedly killing him, much to his shock. Although he's initially overjoyed, without his trusty rival, Megamind begins to become listless and depressed, feeling like he has no real direction in his life. And after disguising himself as museum curator Bernard, Megamind connects with Roxanne and is inspired to make his own rival that he can have endless battles against, creating a serum out of Metro Man's DNA before accidentally injecting it into Hal, Roxanne's idiot cameraman who's also desperately in love with her. Despite warnings from his trusty minion, Megamind proceeds with his experiment, despite Hal clearly not being cut out for the job. And so, disguising himself as Hal's space dad, he begins to train him as a hero. But the newly christened Titan is left heartbroken after being rejected by Roxanne, who was currently on a date with Bernard, aka Megamind, and thus he goes on a crime spree. Meanwhile, Megamind's disguise as Bernard fails, and Roxanne promptly dumps him. And thus, he decides to try and go full villain again, only to find that Titan has usurped his role, and in an attempt to talk him around to being a hero, Megamind reveals that he was Space Dad and that he had been on the date with Roxanne, which, instead of firing Hal up, enrages him into attempted murder, and he begins to lay waste to the city. Roxanne and Megamind then team up to go to Metro Man's old hideout in hopes of finding a way to defeat Titan, only to find that Metro Man is actually not dead, and that he'd faked his death in order to switch career paths and follow his dream of becoming a musician. He refuses to return and help fight, but he tells Megamind that a new hero will always rise up to defeat evil. But Megamind gets depressed at this and returns himself to prison to avoid his mistakes. Meanwhile, Roxanne's kidnapped by Titan, who makes an announcement threatening to kill her unless Megamind comes out to fight him. And so Minion busts him out of prison, and the pair reunite to take Titan down, eventually managing to use their extraction gun to revert Titan to human form and send him off to jail. Whilst they're celebrated as the city's new heroes, and the Metro Man Museum is officially converted to the Megamind Museum, which seems like a sudden shift, but sure, okay, why not? And once again, I loved this thing. I didn't expect to, but it blew me away. And I came out of it with a massive appreciation for all aspects of the film. So, imagine my surprise when I saw it really didn't do all that well compared to what I would have expected. Like, it didn't do badly, but for me this film's a goddamn revelation, and I'm so salty at its reception. And we'll start off with its box office. It grossed $321 million off a budget of $130 million. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad box office return, but it certainly isn't what it could have been. And even though it did come up against some stiff competition a couple weeks after its release in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Tangled, I can't help but feel that even then, it still has a box office that's far too low for the quality of the film. And don't even get me started on the critical reception. A 72% on Rotten Tomatoes, yeah, okay, I get it, and a 63 out of 100 on Metacritic? And look, I realise that these aren't bad scores, but but they also certainly aren't what I'd expect for a film of this caliber. I'm not saying this is a 90% Rotten Tomatoes effort from Dreamworks, but somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s seems very reasonable to me. It just feels like the film is quite underrated. And when I look at the primary complaints about the film, I also felt a little bit triggered, tilted, salty. For the most part, besides complaints about the humour, which I guess is something that's impossible to be objective about as everybody finds different things funny, and honestly I did find this film hilarious, the main things I kept seeing over and over was that the film was lacking in originality, that it was derivative, and had been there and done that. And there were a few examples of how it was unoriginal drawn from the reviews to illustrate this point, and I'll go through them each in turn. The first of the complaints came to its similarity with The Incredibles. And honestly, this one had me scratching my head, like what? What about this film resembles The Incredibles despite having superheroes in it? Is that seriously all they can think of? Oh, Pixar made a superhero animated film in 2004, so this means that this film released in 2010 that shares almost none of the same themes or setting or plot devices is lacking in originality. Like, what? The tone of the film is completely different. The characters are completely different. Is this seriously the best they got? The Incredibles is set in the 60s. It tells the story of the Parr family, headed by Bob Parr, the former Mr. Incredible, a now washed-up superhero who brought about the end of the Age of Heroes by injuring a man whilst trying to stop him from committing suicide. It is a funny film, but it also oozes melancholy and family angst as this father begins to neglect his family life to relive his glory days in secret, before finally needing to face off with the ghosts of his past. The Incredibles feels much more like a social commentary on the old superhero tropes. A film that unravels the reality of being a hero and adding realistic touches like lawsuits and government involvement. Megamind is more of a straight up parody that simply aims to make you laugh at the various different tropes of the superhero genre by flipping them on their head. There isn't that much that ties these two films together, other than the fact that they both feature superheroes. Or maybe it's the fact that the main villain has red hair and has white on his suit. Ooh, perish the thought! Seriously, if these are the types of similarities that turned off critics based on lack of originality, they must just be having aneurysm after aneurysm after a good 10 years of Marvel dominance. Just so many different heroes that have vague similarities to each other. They must have been driven mad! But that's not the only film to which comparisons were drawn. Similarly, critics lambasted this film for being too similar to Despicable Me. And I will admit there are similarities. Villain turns into hero, absurdist humour, combining surreal jokes and slapstick, a protagonist who looks and sounds different from a normal person, an antagonist who's kind of a dweeb, but really the comparisons stop there. The outer layer is similar, but the core is so different. Despicable Me is more of a spy/thriller parody. Megamind is about superheroes. Gru becomes good because he realizes that he loves 3 girls like his own daughters and that they need him. They need him to be a hero, not a villain. Megamind becomes a hero though because he feels like he's lost purpose without a hero to face off with. And since his experiment to make a new one failed, he has to do it himself. Plus he got a taste of the good life and romance and all that, and he wants a piece of that action. Like, I get that they're similar, but I do think the similarity is very overblown, especially in hindsight 10 years on. I mean, on top of that, the films were in production around the same time. If this was a film released a couple of years after, yeah, I'd get it. I'd get why it's being called unoriginal. But it was released like a couple of months later, both in 2010. It hardly seems fair to call this film derivative in that context. And yet, that's what we've found ourselves doing. And I think it's a shame because if you put those criticisms aside, I do think the film has a lot to offer. It might not be on the level of Shrek or some of DreamWorks' top works, but it certainly is much better than I think people give it credit for, and combines stellar voice acting with high quality visuals, an amusing concept, and exciting and well-paced script. Yeah, it has similarities to other films, but so do many films that we hold up as classics. It just feels like a very strange double standard to hold in this specific instance. But anyway, that's the end of the video. And I would like to say that these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of Megamind, if you've seen it? Do you like it, hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.